The cable's snapping! The cable's snapping! Sarah Martinez's voice pierced through the summer air, raw with terror, as she watched the impossible unfold 200 feet below her. For a split second, everything froze. The laughter from the midway stopped. The carnival music seemed to pause. From the operator booth, maintenance supervisor Jake Thomson shouted frantically, "Emergency stop! Emergency stop!" But the emergency brake didn't engage. Another operator scrambled to reach the master shutdown, his hands shaking as he hit every red button in sight. The backup systems aren't responding. Nothing's responding. In the passenger compartment, 12 people hung suspended in mid-air, their safety harnesses the only thing between them and a 200-foot plunge to the concrete below. Sarah surfaced her head from her hands one last time, blood from a cable strike streaking down her face, her mouth barely able to form the words, "Please, someone help us." Then the second cable snapped, and the compartment lurched another sickening 10 feet downward. This time, the screaming never stopped. June 15th, Thunderbolt Amusement Park. The Apex Drop Tower, 250 feet of steel, an engineering marvel, the tallest freefall ride on the West Coast. For 15 years, it had been the park's crown jewel, its signature attraction, its biggest moneymaker. But behind the gleaming facade and safety certificates was a machine pushed beyond its limits, maintained by a company more concerned with profits than people. And that day, physics and neglect collided in a perfect storm of metal fatigue and corporate greed. In less than 4 minutes, a routine thrill ride would become a death trap no one could escape from. 12 people would never touch solid ground again. You're watching Disaster Chronicles. If this story grips you, subscribe, like, and share, because what you're about to witness is only the beginning. Sarah Martinez wasn't just any amusement park visitor. She was a mechanical engineer for Boeing, someone who understood forces, stresses, and the physics of things that shouldn't fall from the sky. But on June 15th, Sarah was just a thrill seeker celebrating her 30th birthday with 11 friends, looking for the ultimate adrenaline rush. The Apex Drop Tower promised exactly that, a heart-stopping 200-foot free fall at speeds reaching 75 miles per hour, followed by a magnetic brake system that would slow riders to a gentle stop just feet from the ground. For 15 years, the Apex Drop Tower had been Thunderbolt Amusement Park's signature attraction. Visible from 5 miles away, the massive red and silver structure dominated the skyline like a modern skyscraper. Engineering magazines had featured it. Safety inspectors had praised it. Over 2.3 million people had ridden it without serious incident. To the public, it was the safest thrill in the state. To Sarah and her group, it was the perfect way to cap off a birthday celebration. Sarah's group had been planning this trip for months. 12 friends from college, scattered across different careers and cities, reuniting for a weekend of nostalgia and adventure. There was Marcus Chen, a software developer from San Francisco, Lisa Rodriguez, a high school teacher from Sacramento, David Park, an emergency room doctor who, ironically, would understand better than anyone what was about to happen. They'd spent the morning riding roller coasters, playing carnival games, and reliving their college memories. The big tower's gotta be last, Sarah had insisted. Save the best for last. They'd watched it all day, timing the cycles, counting the riders, building anticipation. The Apex Drop Tower ran every 8 minutes like clockwork. Load 12 passengers, lift them 200 feet in 45 seconds, hold them at the top for a heart-stopping 10 seconds, then release them for a 3-second freefall before the magnetic brakes engaged. Simple, reliable, safe. What they couldn't see were the warning signs that maintenance supervisor Jake Thomson had been documenting for months. Microfractures in the support cables, irregular wear patterns on the brake components, computer diagnostics showing stress readings that danced just below the red zone. Most concerning, the ride's cycle time had been gradually increasing, not the 8-minute intervals the public saw, but the mechanical stress cycles that happened every time 12 £0 of passenger compartment and human cargo was lifted, suspended, and dropped. The group approached the apex drop tower at 3:47 p.m., chattering excitedly as they joined the surprisingly short line. Most rides had hour-long waits, but the drop tower's intimidating height kept casual visitors away. Only true thrill-seekers attempted the apex, which meant shorter lines and a more exclusive experience. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Even with her engineering background, the physics of falling 200 feet never got comfortable. "You sure about this, Sarah?" asked Jennifer Walsh, the group's most cautious member. "It's really, really high." Sarah laughed and pointed to the safety placards posted throughout the queue area. "Look at all those certifications. This thing gets inspected monthly. The magnetic brakes have triple redundancy. It's probably safer than driving here." She couldn't know that the monthly inspections had become cursory checklist exercises, or that 2 of the 3 brake systems had been operating at reduced capacity for weeks. The queue moved quickly. At 4:02 p.m., they reached the loading platform, where ride operator Danny Reeves began his well-practiced safety speech. "Welcome to the Apex Drop Tower, the tallest and most thrilling freefall experience on the West Coast. Please step into your assigned seats and secure your safety harness. Keep your arms and legs inside the compartment at all times. This ride reaches speeds of 75 miles per hour and subjects passengers to forces of 4.2 Gs. Anyone with heart conditions, back problems, or pregnancy should not ride." Danny had given this speech thousands of times, but today something felt different. The ride's hydraulic system was making a subtle whining noise he hadn't noticed before. The passenger compartment seemed to settle slightly when all 12 riders were seated, as if the support structure was flexing more than usual. Most concerning, his console was showing a yellow caution light for the secondary brake system, not enough to shut down the ride, but unusual enough that he made a mental note to mention it to maintenance after this cycle. Sarah strapped herself into seat 7, right side of the compartment, directly facing the park's main midway. The safety harness clicked into place with reassuring solidity. The shoulder restraints locked automatically. She looked around at her friends, all showing various degrees of nervous excitement. Marcus was gripping his restraints white-knuckled. Lisa was laughing too loudly. David was checking his watch, timing everything with medical precision. At 4:05 p.m., Danny completed his final safety check and pressed the green launch button. The massive electric motors engaged with a deep hum, and the passenger compartment began its slow, steady climb toward the sky. For 45 seconds, everything was perfect. The compartment rose smoothly, the city spread out below them in stunning detail, and 12 friends prepared for the thrill of their lives. At 4:06 p.m., they reached the apex, 200 feet above ground level, suspended by 4 steel cables, each rated for 3 times the compartment's maximum load. The traditional 10-second pause began, that heart-stopping moment of anticipation before the drop. Sarah looked out over the park, feeling the slight sway of the compartment in the afternoon breeze. She could see the entire city from this height, could feel the awesome power of gravity waiting to reclaim them. At 4:07 p.m., the first cable snapped. The Apex Drop Tower wasn't just a thrill ride. It was a complex engineering system with over 30 individual components, any one of which could fail catastrophically. Built in 2008 by Skyline Attractions, the tower utilized a sophisticated cable and brake system that had revolutionized the amusement park industry. 4 primary support cables lifted the passenger compartment, while 3 independent magnetic brake systems controlled the descent. On paper, it was virtually foolproof. In reality, it was a machine pushed beyond its design limits by corporate pressure and deferred maintenance. The support cables were the tower's most critical component, braided steel wire rope, each strand capable of supporting 50 pounds under normal conditions. The four cables together provided a safety margin of nearly 400% over the compartment's maximum loaded weight. But safety margins meant nothing when maintenance was delayed, inspections were rushed, and warning signs were ignored for months. Cable degradation had been an ongoing concern since 2019. Jake Thomson's maintenance logs documented increasing wear patterns, particularly on cable B, which bore slightly more load due to an imperceptible misalignment in the tower's structure. Monthly inspections noted acceptable wear within tolerance, but the tolerance levels themselves had been adjusted upward 3 times since 2020 to avoid costly cable replacements. The problem was cyclic fatigue, ESR, the slow, invisible process by which metal components weaken under repeated stress. Every time the apex lifted its 12, 0-pound payload, the cables experienced tremendous tension. Every release subjected them to sudden load changes that created microscopic cracks in individual wire strands. Over 400 zero cycles in 15 years, these microfractures had propagated through the cable's core structure. Dr. Michel Torres, a materials engineer who later investigated the accident, explained the physics. Steel cable failure isn't dramatic like in movies. There's no warning snap or visible fraying. Individual wire strands fail over time, gradually reducing the cable's load capacity. By June 15th, Cable B was operating at less than 60% of its rated strength, though visual inspection wouldn't reveal this. The tower's brake system was equally complex and equally compromised. 3 independent magnetic brakes provided redundant safety: primary electromagnetic brakes, secondary eddy current brakes, and emergency friction brakes. All 3 systems had been operating at reduced efficiency for weeks, a fact documented in Thomson's reports but ignored by park management. The primary brake system relied on powerful electromagnets that created opposing magnetic fields, slowing the compartment through electromagnetic induction. These brakes had been installed in 2008 and were nearing the end of their rated service life. Recent diagnostic tests showed 23% reduced braking force, still within acceptable parameters according to manufacturer specifications, but concerning given the secondary system's issues. The secondary brake system had been showing intermittent failures since April. Computer diagnostics recorded dozens of instances where brake engagement was delayed or incomplete. Technicians repeatedly resolved these issues by adjusting software parameters rather than replacing failing hardware components. Each adjustment pushed the system closer to total failure. Most critical was the emergency friction brake system, NDS. Mechanical brakes designed to engage if both magnetic systems failed. These brakes hadn't been properly tested since 2021. Budget constraints had eliminated quarterly emergency brake tests in favor of annual inspections. When park engineers finally examined the friction brakes after the accident, they found brake pads worn to less than 30% thickness and hydraulic fluid contaminated with metal shavings. The tower's computer control system was equally problematic. Originally programmed with conservative safety parameters, the software had been modified dozens of times to optimize ride throughput and reduce operational costs. Critical safety delays had been shortened. Warning thresholds had been raised. Emergency shutdown protocols had been overridden to prevent false alarms that interrupted park operations. Thunderbolt Amusement Park's financial pressures had created a perfect storm of deferred maintenance and corner cutting. The park was struggling financially, facing increased competition from larger theme parks and declining attendance. Insurance costs had skyrocketed after several industry accidents at other parks. The Apex Drop Tower was simultaneously the park's biggest draw and its most expensive attraction to maintain properly. Park management had embraced a run-to-failure maintenance philosophy, operating equipment until it actually broke, rather than replacing components proactively. This approach saved money in the short term, but created exponentially higher risks over time. For rides like roller coasters with redundant safety systems, this philosophy was dangerous. For a drop tower, with passengers suspended 200 feet in the air, it was criminal. The final contributing factor was human error and institutional complacency. Jake Thomson had been documenting problems for months, filing detailed maintenance reports that disappeared into administrative bureaucracy. His requests for cable replacement had been denied 3 times due to budget constraints. His recommendations for brake system overhaul had been postponed indefinitely. Nobody wanted to hear about problems, Thomson later testified. Management wanted good news and on-time operations. When I filed reports about safety concerns, I was told I was being overly cautious. When I pushed harder, I was threatened with termination. The message was clear: keep the ride running or find another job. The morning of June 15th provided the final warning that went unheeded. During pre-operational testing, Cable B showed stress readings 15% higher than normal. The primary brake system engaged 0.7 seconds later than programmed. The emergency brake test resulted in a yellow caution light that operators were trained to ignore unless it turned red. At 3:30 p.m., just 36 minutes before Sarah's group boarded, Thomson made his final attempt to shut down the ride. He approached operations manager Carol Stevens with his concerns about that morning's diagnostic readings. Stevens dismissed him immediately. "We've got 6 groups in line and a birthday party booked at 4:15. The ride stays operational unless we have a red light emergency." At 4:07 p.m., Cable B snapped under 12.0 pounds of passenger weight, creating exactly the red light emergency Stevens claimed would shut down the ride. But by then, 12 people were suspended 200 feet above the ground, and no emergency system in the world could save them from the cascade of mechanical failures about to unfold. Behind Thunderbolt Amusement Park's family-friendly facade lay a history of safety violations, ignored warnings, and corporate decisions that prioritized profits over human lives. For 15 years, the park had been cited multiple times by state safety inspectors. Rides operated beyond recommended cycles, maintenance records falsified, safety equipment bypassed to reduce operational costs. Each time, the park paid fines, issued public statements about their commitment to safety, and returned to business as usual. The pattern was established early. In 2011, just 3 years after the Apex Drop Tower opened, state inspectors found evidence of accelerated maintenance schedules, critical safety checks performed every 60 days instead of the required 30-day intervals. Park management claimed it was a paperwork error and paid the 15.0 fine. Internal emails later revealed this was deliberate cost-cutting that saved the park approximately 200.0 annually in maintenance labour. By 2015, the problems had escalated. A surprise inspection revealed that the Apex's emergency brake system hadn't been properly tested in 8 months. Hydraulic fluid in the friction brake system was found to be contaminated with metal particles, indicating significant internal wear. The park was ordered to shut down the ride until repairs were completed. Instead of comprehensive repairs, park engineers performed minimal fixes and had the ride reopened within 72 hours. Former safety inspector Robert Kim testified about the park's pattern of resistance. Every inspection became a battle. They'd argue about everything: testing procedures, safety margins, interpretation of regulations. They hired lawyers to challenge our findings and lobbied state officials to reduce inspection frequency. They treated safety compliance as an obstacle to overcome rather than lives to protect. The park's financial situation created impossible pressures. Thunderbolt was independently owned, competing against massive corporate theme parks with unlimited maintenance budgets. Annual revenue had declined 23% between 2018 and 2022. Insurance costs had tripled after industry-wide accidents raised liability concerns. The Apex Drop Tower, which cost $3.2 million to build, required approximately $400,000 annually in proper maintenance, nearly 15% of the park's total profit margin. Corporate emails revealed the true priorities. In March 2023, 3 months before the accident, Park CEO Michael Harrison wrote to Operations Manager Carol Stevens, "We cannot afford another year of declining attendance. The Apex is our signature attraction and must remain operational at maximum capacity throughout the season. Find ways to optimize maintenance schedules without compromising guest experience." Stevens translated this corporate speak into concrete actions. Maintenance windows were reduced from 8 hours weekly to 4 hours bi-weekly. Preventive component replacement was delayed until showing obvious signs of wear. Most critically, the annual shutdown for comprehensive safety inspection was shortened from 10 days to 3 days, barely enough time for cursory examinations. Maintenance supervisor Jake Thomson found himself caught between his professional ethics and employment survival. His detailed reports documenting safety concerns were consistently ignored or buried in bureaucratic processes. When he escalated his concerns to park management, he was labeled a problem employee and threatened with termination. The message was crystal clear, Thompson later testified. "My job was to keep rides running, not to find reasons to shut them down. When I documented safety issues, I was accused of creating problems where none existed. When those problems led to operational delays, I was blamed for lost revenue." The park's approach to safety inspections was particularly troubling. Rather than viewing inspectors as safety partners, park management treated them as adversaries to be managed and minimized. They hired consultant engineers to provide second opinions that contradicted state inspector findings. They challenged inspection methodologies and questioned inspector qualifications. Most insidiously, they timed major maintenance to occur immediately after inspections, creating artificial compliance windows. This adversarial relationship had tragic consequences. State Inspector Linda Chen had been documenting concerning trends at the Apex Drop Tower since 2021. Her reports noted increasing component wear, declining safety margins, and maintenance practices that met minimum legal requirements while ignoring manufacturer recommendations. Each time she recommended enhanced inspections or operational restrictions, park management pushed back with technical arguments and legal challenges. They were brilliant at finding loopholes, Chen later testified. Every regulation has some ambiguity, some grey area they could exploit. They'd operate right at the edge of legal compliance, arguing that meeting minimum standards was sufficient. They couldn't see, or chose not to see, that minimum standards are starting points, not destinations. The park's insurance situation created additional perverse incentives. Their liability policy included significant deductibles and excluded certain types of mechanical failures. To minimize insurance costs, park management actively discouraged incident reporting and pressured employees to classify accidents as guest error rather than equipment malfunction. This created a culture where safety problems were hidden rather than addressed. Staff turnover reflected the toxic safety culture. Between 2020 and 2023, the park lost 70% of its experienced maintenance technicians. Exit interviews consistently cited safety concerns and management pressure to cut corners. Replacement technicians were typically younger, less experienced, and less likely to challenge questionable decisions. The experienced guys knew what proper maintenance looked like, said former technician Maria Santos, who quit 3 months before the accident. When management started pushing us to skip steps and extend service intervals, the old-timers pushed back. Management's response was to make their lives miserable until they quit. The new guys didn't know any better, so they just followed orders. The final warning came from an unexpected source. In April 2023, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Apex, ironically, one of the passengers in Sarah's group, 10 Jen, had filed a formal complaint with state authorities after observing concerning vibrations and sounds during a previous ride on the Apex. Her complaint triggered an unscheduled inspection that found multiple safety violations, including the contaminated brake fluid and overtensioned cables. Park management responded to this inspection with their typical pattern of minimal compliance and aggressive pushback. They replaced the brake fluid, but not the damaged brake components causing the contamination. They adjusted cable tension, but didn't address the underlying misalignment causing uneven wear. Most critically, they convinced inspectors that these were isolated issues rather than symptoms of systemic maintenance failures. The inspection report concluded that while violations were found, they were within correctable parameters and didn't require ride closure. Park management celebrated this finding as vindication of their safety practices. In reality, it was the final missed opportunity to prevent a tragedy that had become inevitable through years of corporate negligence and willful blindness to mounting dangers. 4, 6, 7 p.m. Cable B snapped with a sound like a rifle shot that echoed across the entire park. The passenger compartment lurched violently to one side, throwing all 12 occupants against their restraints with brutal force. Sarah Martinez felt the world tilt impossibly as the compartment swung in a sickening arc, now supported by only 3 cables instead of 4. The mechanical balance that had held them safely for 15 years was gone in an instant. "What was that?" Marcus Chen screamed, his voice cracking with terror as he looked down at the ground, now seeming impossibly far below. The compartment was swaying in the breeze, creaking ominously as the remaining 3 cables struggled to support the full 12 0-pound load they were never designed to carry alone. In the operator booth, Danny Reeves watched his control panel explode with red warning lights. Cable tension sensors showed catastrophic failure. Load distribution readings were completely outside normal parameters. Every safety system was screaming that something had gone horribly wrong 200 feet above the ground. His training kicked in immediately. Emergency protocol. All personnel to emergency stations. But the emergency protocol was about to fail as catastrophically as the cable. Jake Thomson was running toward the tower before most people even understood what had happened. The sound of the cable snapping was unmistakable to anyone who'd worked around heavy machinery. He grabbed his radio and shouted the words he'd hoped never to say: "Apex emergency, cable failure with passengers on board, initiate immediate emergency descent." Danny stabbed the emergency descent button. Nothing happened. The compartment remained suspended at 200 feet, swaying sickeningly in the afternoon breeze. He tried again. Still nothing. The primary brake system wasn't engaging. The emergency descent sequence wasn't responding. 12 people were trapped in the sky with no way down. "The brakes aren't responding," Danny's voice cracked as he radioed Thomson. "Nothing's working. The computer's showing system failures across the board." Sarah, with her engineering background, understood before the others what the swaying motion meant. The compartment's weight was now distributed unequally across 3 cables. The remaining cables were experiencing forces they weren't designed to handle. Metal fatigue that had been building for months was now accelerated exponentially. She could see one of the remaining cables beginning to fray, individual wire strands popping with tiny metallic pings. "We need to stay calm," she called out to her friends, though her own voice was shaking. "The emergency systems will kick in. They'll get us down." She was lying, and somewhere deep in her engineer's mind, she knew it. The swaying was getting worse, not better. Whatever had caused the first cable to snap was still happening. 4, 7, 15 p.m., the second cable failed. The compartment dropped 10 feet in a heart-stopping lurch before the remaining 2 cables caught the load. The sudden deceleration threw everyone upward against their restraints, then slammed them down with crushing force. Jennifer Walsh felt something pop in her ribs. David Park's head snapped forward, so hard he bit through his tongue. Lisa Rodriguez was screaming continuously now, a sound of pure animal terror. On the ground, Jake Thomson was racing through emergency procedures he'd hoped never to use. The manual emergency brake system required him to physically climb the tower structure and engage mechanical releases. But the climb to the emergency brake housing would take at least 15 minutes, time they almost certainly didn't have. "Call 911, he shouted to anyone within earshot. "Get the fire department. We need their aerial ladder truck." But even as he said it, he knew the fire department's 100-foot aerial ladder wouldn't reach passengers suspended at 200 feet. Carol Stevens, the operations manager, arrived at the scene and immediately began damage control rather than rescue coordination. Her first concern wasn't the trapped passengers, but the crowd of witnesses forming around the tower base. "Get those people away from here," she ordered. "No photos, no videos. Clear the area immediately." But it was too late. Dozens of park visitors had their phones out, recording the nightmare unfolding above them. Social media was about to broadcast 12 people's final moments to the world. 4:42 p.m. The third cable snapped. Now, only cable A remained, a single braided steel rope supporting 12 0-pounds. It was never designed to carry alone. The compartment tilted at a horrific angle, throwing passengers against the side walls. Sarah found herself looking almost straight down at the concrete pad 200 feet below, held in her seat only by a safety harness that suddenly felt impossibly flimsy. The physics were inexorable now. Cable A was experiencing nearly 4 times its designed load. The cable that had shown stress readings 15% above normal that morning was now operating at 400% capacity. Metal fatigue that had been accumulating over 400 cycles was about to reach its catastrophic conclusion. Jake Thomson reached the base of the tower and began climbing the maintenance ladder built into the structure. His radio crackled with desperate updates. Emergency services ETA 12 minutes. Aerial ladder truck en route. Medical helicopter dispatched. All meaningless if the final cable snapped in the next 60 seconds. In the compartment, Dr. David Park was trying to keep everyone conscious and coherent. Several passengers were hyperventilating. Jennifer was slipping in and out of consciousness from her head injury, but Sarah remained focused, her engineer's mind working frantically on a problem with no solution. "The angle's getting worse," she called to David. "The compartment's going to flip completely if that last cable gives way." She didn't say what they both understood. If the compartment inverted, their safety harnesses wouldn't hold them. They'd fall out long before hitting the ground. 4:23 p.m. Thomson reached the emergency brake housing, 150 feet above ground, but still 50 feet below the trapped passengers. His hands were shaking as he accessed the manual brake release. This system was designed to engage the friction brakes mechanically, bypassing all computer controls. It was the absolute last resort, capable of stopping the compartment even without magnetic brakes. He pulled the emergency release lever. Nothing happened. The friction brakes that hadn't been properly maintained in 2 years were completely seized. Contaminated hydraulic fluid had turned to sludge. Brake pads worn to 30% thickness couldn't generate enough friction to matter. The emergency system was as dead as the computer-controlled systems. 4:15 p.m. Cable A began its final failure sequence. Individual wire strands started popping in rapid succession, each failure transferring more load to the remaining strands. Sarah could hear it, a horrific symphony of tiny metallic snaps that sounded like firecrackers. She looked at her friends, people she'd known for over a decade, and realized they had perhaps 30 seconds left. "I love you all," she said quietly, and meant it more than any words she'd ever spoken. At 4:47 p.m., Cable A parted completely. 12 people fell 200 feet at 32 feet per second squared, reaching a terminal velocity of nearly 80 miles per hour before impacting the concrete safety pad with a combined force of over £2.4 million. The passenger compartment, designed to protect occupants during controlled descents, disintegrated on impact. None of the 12 occupants survived. The accident investigation would later reveal that the emergency brake system had been non-functional for over 18 months. The computer control systems had been programmed to ignore safety warnings to reduce false alarms. The cables had been operating beyond safe parameters for nearly 2 years. Every safety system had failed, and every warning had been ignored. Jake Thomson survived because he was climbing the tower when the final cable snapped. He watched 12 people die because of maintenance he'd been forbidden to perform, safety concerns he'd been punished for raising, and corporate decisions that valued profits over human lives. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Thunderbolt Amusement Park closed permanently within 48 hours. Criminal charges were filed against park management. Wrongful death lawsuits totaling $180 million bankrupted the park's corporate owners. But no amount of money or justice could bring back 12 friends who had simply wanted to celebrate a birthday with the ultimate thrill ride. Sarah Martinez had been right about one thing. The Apex Drop Tower was an engineering marvel. But engineering marvels require proper maintenance, honest safety inspections, and corporate leaders who understand that some risks are never worth taking. When those elements fail, even the most sophisticated technology becomes a death trap suspended 200 feet above the ground. The 12 victims died not because of mechanical failure, but because of human failure, the failure to maintain equipment properly, to heed safety warnings, and to put human lives above corporate profits. Their deaths were entirely preventable, the result of a system that had been failing for years while everyone responsible looked the other way. Today, the Apex Drop Tower site sits empty, marked only by a memorial garden and 12 bronze plaques bearing the names of friends who trusted their lives to a machine that had been designed to thrill but had been allowed to kill. The memorial reads, "In memory of those lost to corporate negligence and preventable tragedy." If you were moved by this story, consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you dramatic recreations of true disaster stories that deserve to be remembered, understood, and learned from. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. And as always, question authority when your safety is at stake. We'll see you in the next episode.